Welcome to another episode of Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Sam Stone. As always, we're jumping right into it with our first guest up today, Elie Cantin-Nantel. He is a bilingual, multi-skilled journalist, columnist, commentator, and content creator based in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He's worked for The Hub, True North, Post Millennial, and as a political staffer on Parliament Hill. I definitely am going to want to touch on that one a little bit, Elie. So thank you so much for joining us on this program. Folks, follow him on X at Elie, ELIE _MCN. And Elie, tell us a little bit, how'd you get into doing the work you do? How'd you get into this journalist space?
Sure. So it was completely accidental. I went to school thinking I would go work as a lawyer, and then COVID hit, and I had nothing to do. As some of your listeners may be aware or may remember, Canada locked down probably harder than any blue state in the United States. Like we were completely locked down. So I had absolutely nothing to do for quite a long time. And I was bored, so I decided to start a podcast in my living room. And a lot of our politicians had nothing to do because they too were kind of locked down and Parliament was closed. And so a bunch of people suddenly had a bunch of free time. So I decided to start a podcast and I began interviewing some politicians. We had our equivalent to a Republican primary at the time. So I began interviewing some of the candidates and then I started interviewing some of members of Parliament. And that's really when I got started. Now, that particular little podcast landed me a job on Parliament Hill working for a member of Parliament, which is our equivalent to a congressman or a congresswoman. And I did that for a bit. And then I decided to go back into political media while I was starting university. And so I started working for True North, which is basically the Canadian equivalent of the Daily Wire. And literally 2 months after, sorry, not 2 months, 2 weeks after that stint began, I was living in Ottawa, our capital. The trucker convoy rolled in, and this was in 2022, and the truckers that were sick of the lockdowns rolled in. So that was my first assignment. Right away, I was covering what is arguably the biggest story in Canada of the decade or maybe the century. So I got really into it. I got a lot of engagement out of that, and I kind of discovered a passion for it, and I've been continuing doing it ever since.
So one of the things I think that maybe we haven't talked about much in this country for a lot of reasons, or at least not on the right. I think on the left, they probably don't want to give Donald Trump this much credit, but how much did he hurt Pierre Poilievre in that election you just referred to? Because it seemed like Poilievre had a lot of momentum heading in there, and then Trump started making some comments about Canada that I'm a Trump supporter, but they might have been a bit ill-advised. And it seemed to really affect that race.
Yes. So Canada is very sensitive to Trump. We have a media ecosystem. We have a public broadcaster that is basically take PBS, but PBS is like the biggest broadcaster in the country in Canada. It's called the CBC, and it's basically to the left of MSNBC, and that's what most Canadians watch every night. And they obsess with Trump. I was actually down in Arizona at America Fest in December, and I was showing some of the people like this is what the website looks like right now, and the top 8 stories were all about Trump and not about Canada. So Canadians are bombarded with anti-Trump media 24/7. And what happened in the last election is the older folks, the baby boomers especially, who watch cable TV, who consume this type of content, they began to get very worried about the comments of 51st State, the tariffs. These are people who are wealthier, they have assets. And they basically, it was a generational thing where all the baby boomers voted to the left and all the young people voted to the right. But because young people don't vote as much as older people, the boomers were able to swing the election. So yes, Pierre Poilievre had a very large double-digit lead over the Liberals prior to the tariff comments. It was everybody just thought he was going to win. The business world that just before the election and a bit after the election, I worked for I was kind of doing communications consulting on top of some media work, and we had a lot of clients coming in wanting to get, I was helping them tailor their message for a conservative government. That was the whole business world thought conservatives are going to win, and then everything changed. I do think Pierre could have done a few things to maybe reduce the damage. Like he just went on Joe Rogan. I thought he should have done that a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he should have done these podcasts a year ago. But yeah, this particular situation caused Canadians, I would say, and I don't really blame Trump 100%. I also blame our media. It was kind of a great gaslighting operation that was triggered by the comments. And Canadians were basically gaslit into re-electing the government that had done, great damage to the economy, to public safety, to the trust system, immigration. The Proud Party, the Liberal Party that had created all these problems in Canada, including the trade problems, was suddenly seen as the savior to fix all these problems. And they got Mark Carney, who had three passports, who was previously calling himself a European. He called himself proudly a globalist and an elitist to become our prime minister. And things have not gotten better, but Canadians are being sold this idea that things are getting better.
How much of a shock was it? There was, I don't know, you probably saw the recent, I believe it was CBC, sent some reporters to Alabama. And I was laughing at some of the reporting and coverage that came out of that because of their misconceptions of Alabama going in. I mean, it was literally like they expected to find everyone there in a broken down pickup, barefoot on the side of the road, making moonshine. I mean, and they found a state that, frankly, has been one of the great success stories of the last decade. How much of a shock was that reporting for Canadians?
Well, actually, what is a shock is Alabama is now richer than Canada.
Yeah.
So they've done some studies. 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, Alberta, which is our oil-rich province, is our origin of Texas. There was only a couple U.S. states that were wealthier than Alberta. Um, Around 10 years ago, Canada, in fact, had the wealthiest middle class in the world. And I remember as a kid, when we thought about the US dollar, we thought about it as a weaker currency because oftentimes our dollar traded above the US dollar, and oftentimes it was very close. So Canadians would go to the US for like Black Friday shopping because, well, you guys have better sales usually, but our currency was worth about the same. I went to Arizona in December. I gave the woman at the airport 100 Canadian dollars. She gave me back 55 US dollars. Of
Oh,
course, there's some exchange fees there, but
I didn't realize
everything
it
in
had
Canada,
gotten that
yeah,
dramatic.
yeah, so the economy is our dollar is sometimes trades at 68 cents US. Like our economy has been crippled. Canadians aren't as wealthy as they used to be. The per capita, how much is being spent per worker isn't as much. And something else that's happening as a result of that is there's something called a brain drain where you have young professionals that are leaving and also wealthy people. So Justin Trudeau famously raised taxes on the rich, and now 40% of Canada's 1% have left the country. And they estimate that, of the top 10%, up to 50% have also left because here we get taxed at up to 53% if you're a wealthy person. And I just went to a college campus when I was in Alberta and I asked people if they wanted to move to the US, and 80% of the people I interviewed said yes. So CBC probably was shocked because they think of Alabama as like this kind of redneck place where it's like a bunch of farmers and a bunch of low IQ people. But in reality, it's a successful red state. You have a lot of very educated people, you have entrepreneurial people, and most importantly, that state is wealthier than Canada.
It's astounding. I mean, I grew up partially in Lake Placid, New York, so I used to go to Montreal quite a bit. First with my family, and then once I turned about 16, 17, and the bars there didn't card and pretended you were 18. We went with my friends all the time. And it was, I mean, economically, you couldn't really tell a difference between the two. I went back last year, and it was dramatic. I mean, really, you can tell from looking through, seeing a city like Montreal, the decline has been real. So is there now a recognition coming that maybe changes really have to be made? And then I want to get into the separatist movement a little bit because you were there recently talking to the people in Alberta. But is reality sinking in for the Canadian population that this path they've been on is really disastrous?
Well, we thought reality had sunk in last year and the year before when the Conservatives were ahead in the polls. The whole idea, and we finally thought people have woken up to the fact that crime had exploded under Liberals, car thefts, home invasions. And keep in mind, Canada, if you're being invaded by your home, if your home is being invaded and you defend yourself using a firearm, oftentimes you get charged yourself. We don't have the same self-defense rights as you do. You can't go down a street without seeing open air drug use. I mean, I live
Mm-hmm.
in Ottawa, our capital city, G7 capital, and you walk down just 2 minutes from Parliament, and it looks like a war zone. This is supposed to be the nicest mall in the country. It looks like in the city, sorry, and it looks like an absolute war zone. All the high-end stores have closed down. It's you feel it. You feel it every day. But unfortunately, you have a large number of Canadians, particularly of the baby boomer generation, who don't spend a lot of time in the cities, in the city centers, and their top preoccupation is the president of the United States. There was a woman interviewed during the election, and I love somebody they changed the background for Burning House, and this woman was saying, "I'm voting for the Liberal because Trump is our number one concern," and I know that Carney is going to deal with that. We have, unfortunately, a lot of Canadians that seem like they just will not wake up. And that's part of why I think, unfortunately, you're seeing a lot of, especially younger people, they're giving up. I mean, I have two friends who have already left for the States in the last 2, 3 years, and I know a lot more that's in the plan because, unfortunately, like you're seeing the country go downhill, and that's bad enough. But the fact that people aren't being aware of that, if there was an election today, Carney would win one of the biggest majorities in Canadian history. That concerns me, and it's also not very inspiring.
Well, I think one of the things I find most interesting about that, Ellie, is that if you look at the history, and we have 5 years now, right, of Trump as the president,
Hmm.
and in dealing with other world leaders, it's very clear who manages to advance their country's interests in dealing with Trump. It's people who aren't attacking him all the time, but are willing to work with him. He respects you if you stand up for your own country, but he takes it very personally and seriously if you're throwing shade at him or ours. So how is the media narrative and like I can deal with Trump? There's no question Pierre Poilievre would have had a much better track record dealing with Trump on behalf of Canada than Mark Carney.
For sure, but unfortunately, as you probably know, politics is all about optics. And the Canadian people during the election, they wanted to see someone who was anti-Trump. Like Mark Carney literally declared during the election, our relationship with the U.S. is over. We have Doug Ford, who's in Ontario, our equivalent of a governor. It's called a premier. He's supposed to be a conservative, but he's the most anti-Trump politician out there. I believe you can fact
I,
check this
I
if it's
think
not.
he's Chris Christie's secret brother there, Ellie. We're going to be going to break. We're going to come back with more from Elie Cantin-Nantel here in just a moment. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. We're continuing on now with Elie Cantin-Nantel, Canadian journalist. Follow him on X at Ellie_MCN. Ellie, before we went to break, we're talking about kind of general politics, but Canada and the U.S., but I want to get into some of the specifics of the two separatist movements kind of pulling at the fabric of Canada right now. Um, we're going to spend some time on the Alberta one, but first I want to touch really quickly on a piece you had or an X post you had about Quebec's separatist party won the riding of Chicoutimi. Tell us first what that means. I think probably most Americans like me have no idea. And then second, give us a quick rundown of what's going on there.
Sure. So just for clarification, a riding is a Canadian version of a congressional district. And in the case of the Quebec example, it's an equivalent of a state house seat, basically. That the Parti québécois, which is a separatist party in Quebec, a long-time separatist party in Quebec, recently won. There's some very important context here. So first of all, everybody thought that the Parti québécois was dead after the last election. They had their worst result. They were reduced to just 3 seats. And so Quebec separatism remains actually very unpopular. There was a poll done just the other day, and they found that 71% of Quebecers would vote to stay in Canada. But the PQ had been on the rise. This is their fourth special election in a row that they flipped for a few reasons. First of all, the incumbent government is the governor, the premier of Quebec, François Legault, is very, very unpopular. Quebec has very different political parties from a two-party system. It's a multi-party system, and their party is also very different from the rest of Canada. This guy was supposed to be a conservative, kind of nationalist premier, and he ended up just being all over the place, flip-flopping. There was a bunch of scandals in his second term, including a lot of money giving to corporate subsidies that ended up not working out, broken promises. So he became very unpopular. And the leader of the Separatist Party is a very likable guy. He's very charismatic. He's very smart. He's supposed to be a left winger, but he's very anti-woke. In fact, he even once said he would never be compelled to use they, them pronouns.
Hmm.
So he and people in Quebec, even though they're liberal, they really don't like woke culture. They actually view it as Americanization of their culture, given that a lot of the wokeness comes from places like Harvard, Yale, etc.
Well, and the
So this guy
background
had,
to all of this is that Quebec is a very Francophile area.
yes, exactly. So in the background of all of this, the PQ started to rise, but not the separatist movement. But so that's why you started to see these seats flip, including the one in Chicoutimi, because people started liking this party. But now that people see that the separatist party could actually form government again, we've actually seen the polls change,
Yeah.
and the provincial liberals are also now gaining steam.
Interesting. All right, moving on to
Yeah.
Alberta, because this is probably the much more serious one for Canada.
Yes.
What is going on there? What are the chances that Alberta will actually at some point vote to form a separate state?
All right, so I'll divide this answer in three parts. The first part, what has happened? So Alberta, every election votes conservative. And since 2015, so for over a decade now, they have had basically their votes invalidated. And by that, I don't mean that their votes didn't count. They elected their representatives. Just uh, a note, Canada has a parliamentary system, so we don't vote for the prime minister. It's the equivalent of only voting for your member of Congress, and which party has the most seats gets to form government. It's just like in the United Kingdom. So Alberta will vote a bunch of conservative members of parliament, but the East, where I live in Ontario, Quebec, which is kind of like basically imagine California and New York deciding all your elections. That's basically what's happening for Alberta. So after 10 years after the last election, people are getting fed up because the Liberal Party of Canada was very environmentalist and did not support the province's oil and gas resources. And in 10 years, there was $670 billion of natural resources projects that were canceled.
Jeez.
So there was a lot of economic downturn in Alberta. So were getting really fed up. And the last election where the East was gaslit into voting for Carney was kind of like the final straw. So number two, what's happening now? So Alberta has a direct democracy type system, kind of like many US states, where people can sign a petition and they can put a referendum, a ballot initiative on a ballot. So what's happening right now is that the separatist activists are gathering signatures to put a question on the ballot. Do you want Alberta to leave Canada? In Canadian law, we have something called the Clarity Act, where a province is able to secede from Canada if they work with the federal government and if there's a clear question. So they're working on that right now. They need, I believe, something like 130,000 signatures, and they think they'll get something like between 700,000 to 1 million signatures. So
Wow.
there's a
Wait,
lot of momentum.
what is the population of Alberta?
Alberta is a couple million, I believe. I
So
don't
I
have the
mean,
number at the top of my head.
they may
It's
end
around
up
four.
getting a really
So
substantial portion of that
so
population to sign.
yeah. So the polls show right now that 41% of Albertans believe their province would be better off as its own country. So that's the polls. Now, what I went to Alberta and what I found very interesting is I met a lot of people that are not separatists, but that are planning to vote yes because they want to send the federal government a message. Now, what
Interesting.
happens if the yes vote is probably more like determined to come out and vote, and you have people that just want to vote yes to send a message? How many of these people are there?
Right.
And we saw with Brexit, people thought that Brexit was going to not happen, and it happened. This is a very real possibility that I don't think people in Canada are taking seriously. The people in Alberta are just fed up. Like they think the system just doesn't work anymore.
In terms of resources, it's a huge percentage of Canada's resources. It would instantly be on a per capita basis. Alberta would instantly be one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, right?
Yes. So the separatist activists are making a lot of promises on that. So they put out these graphics. I actually pulled some up just before the show. They believe that separating could be no income tax, no sales tax, you know, publicly funded like free healthcare, but like actually good free healthcare, unlike the one we have in the rest of Canada. You know, high-speed rail, more hospitals, infrastructure, etc. Now, I did speak with an economist yesterday based in Alberta who says that some of the stuff they're promising is not realistic, and they would have to keep some taxes if they want to fund all of that. But that economist also said that, you know, there's trade-off to both, and there's some trade-offs to leaving, but there's also some consequences, including the fact that you would have some non-tariff trade barriers, maybe some trade barriers, you'd be landlocked. But definitely, right now, we have something called equalization in Canada, where the wealthy provinces have to dump their money to some of the other provinces. And Alberta is giving a lot of money to the other provinces, and the people in Alberta just don't think that that's a fair system. Canada, actually, we're talking about wealthy nations. Canada could be a very wealthy nation. We have
Yeah.
all of these natural resources, and we've had literally politicians and activists saying, keep those resources underground. And as a result, today, we are poorer than Alabama. So, I mean, this is my message to Americans. Like, be careful who you vote in, especially in 28. It takes one person to do serious damage to your country.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you mentioned the healthcare thing, and that's always one I found interesting here because the U.S., for all the impression out there, we don't have a lack of access to care. If you don't have good insurance or even any insurance, say you're here illegally, you could still walk into a hospital and be treated right away. I mean, there might be a
Yes.
wait of a couple hours at the worst time of the day, but you can actually go online for most hospitals and they have a tracker and you can just figure out which one to go to. Canada's system is a disaster at this point with long waits. There's a lot that is going to have to be fixed there to bring it back, which is sad. Elie Cantin-Nantel, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate this. It does make me sad because having grown up near Canada and having visited many times, I always admired the spirit of the Canadian people, their independence and willingness to take on challenges. Need to bring more of that back. Elie
Yes, I mean it
Cantin-Nantel.
is sad, but I'm optimistic in that way. I mean, look at Argentina, look at El Salvador.
Good
Change is
things
possible.
happening. Elie Cantin-Nantel, thank you so much. All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Sam Stone. Chuck Warren out of studio today, but we have our good friend and regular guest, Shay Khatiri, up next. He is a senior fellow at the Yorktown Institute and a researcher for Camera. Shay, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for inviting me back. It looks like I do decent enough a job to be asked to come back.
Well, no, you do a brilliant job because I think, you know, one of the things we're going to get into on the next segment is all the things that the media and public impressions are getting wrong about the Iran war, and it is a lot. But also, you have great contacts, and you're providing information that a lot of people out there need to see and hear. So tell us first, what are some of the latest? What is the latest in the Iran war? What is going on there right now that people need to know?
Well, right now, the biggest news is that we are interested in negotiations with Iran. The president has extended his pause on attacks on Iran's energy plants into April. This is just the energy plants. We're still, we and the Israelis, the coalition forces, still attacking other targets. And we are still degrading Iran's
Military.
strategic capabilities and targeting senior officials, of course. Meanwhile, inside Iran, I don't know if you guys have heard, they've lost a few key people. Some people have died.
Yeah.
And they're replacing these people with very interesting figures. We'll get into it more into the next segment, but people who are being promoted mostly have extensive experience in domestic suppression, not necessarily in foreign policy. For instance, you see IRGC General has succeeded Larijani, who was effectively commander-in-chief after Khamenei died. And, well, you see IRGC General, so this is a military guy. But he was the deputy Basij commander and worked later at the Ministry of, at the judicial branch, not exactly a military position. Or another guy who's been promoted
more
to a key
like
position.
an internal police or secret police.
Exactly. Another guy who's been promoted was the Minister of the State or Minister of Interior, or again, general, but a general who was in charge of domestic security. So what's happening, in my judgment, is that they're really terrified about after the war. They are not looking into continuing this war, and as much as the press want to say, this is not a regime that is confident that they are going to survive this war. They just want to end it and assert control domestically.
How much of the leadership that's left, how much of an infrastructure is there to negotiate with?
You mean
for Trump?
How many regime figures are left?
Yeah, I mean, how do you really make a deal with a fractured regime as much as it is?
Another problem that they have right now is, we heard this, that they had already given instructions before the war to the commanders what to do, and that was in part because they were worried that we would eliminate the commander-in-chief Khamenei and disrupt their command and communication center. But also, second, they don't want to use their communication lines with senior figures because we're going to track that and they're going to get killed. So now we have this offer, and you kind of need to take a cab instead of calling the guy to take the offer to them. This is even... this is not an easy task for them. To the extent that there is even regime leadership left, how are they going to talk to each other? That is another issue. So this is very complicated for the regime to negotiate with itself.
We have just 1 minute left, and folks, if you're not following Shay on X, you need to be doing that. It's at Shay Khatiri, ShayKhatiri. We're going to be coming back with more in the next segment on all of this. But last question before we go to break here. Is there an opportunity now to pull in or to recreate I guess, some sort of coalition or cooperation with a different group of allies right now in the Gulf states to affect the course of this war?
I guess there is an opportunity. I just don't know what they're going to add strategically. People always look that if you add other actors, it's going to be great because you're going to have extra military power, but also it's going to make it very difficult to coordinate with them.
Shay Khatiri, thank you so much. We're coming back with more in just a moment. All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. When we went to break, I was, as I often do, stuffing our guest with a 30-second response to a question that probably demands about 30 minutes to answer appropriately. But we have a little bit longer segment here. I want to get into this a little bit more. Shay Khatiri, senior fellow at the Yorktown Institute, researcher at camera, deeply embedded with the Iranian expat community here. You're from Iran. Your family fled from there after the revolution. So you have insights here that a lot of folks don't. I'm seeing this stuff now about potentially sending in the 82nd Airborne, potentially 10,000 U.S. troops. They're talking about, well, is it a strategic deployment to the island of Karg, that sort of thing. It's hard for me to see regime change occurring in Iran without troops on the ground. How is it possible to get regime change without that? And should we be doing that in the first place? Should Trump be considering troops?
Well, no. At some point over the next few decades, we have to focus on China, and
I mean, given the pace of AI, a few decades, I'm like, yeah, a few days, but okay.
So, I don't think so. And besides, keep in mind, such a massive operation would require congressional authorization, which neither the president nor Congress seem to be in the mood for. But as for 10,000 troops, it's not just Kharg. There's also the island of Kashmir, which is very close to the strait. Kharg is at the westernmost of the Persian Gulf, which is just an oil hub. There are other island targets that we might actually want to take over with Marine Expeditionary Force. And the 82nd Airborne, we might actually have to do a raid inside Iran to grab nuclear material or just hold territory to open the strait by holding territory that is used for launch of drones, things like that. So there are all those considerations. But 10,000 is not going to be enough for regime change. I still think that there is a very good case for us to keep degrading Iran's domestic suppression capabilities, as we are doing, especially Israelis are doing, for Iranians to overthrow the regime themselves. You know, when we talk about a ground component, we should always consider that there is an army inside Iran that is the Iranian people. That's going to take longer. We might have to focus on them to provide them with resources and training to do things like that. And there have been some efforts to that extent in the past to increase that. But I don't think that it should be American boots on the ground. I like to frame it as we should not do regime change. We should pave the way for the Iranian people to do the regime change.
Okay. Are there other it seems like the U.S. has a really bad history of arming populations for regime change. But are there other forces in the region? I know people have talked about the Kurds and others who could assist with that and help lead that effort.
You know, I don't agree with that, actually. We have quite a good record in regime change by arming local populations in Latin America. Yeah, you know, it always gets a bad rap of what happened with these atrocities and those atrocities, and I don't want to excuse for those, but the outcome, aside from those tactical problems, the outcome of that was Nicaragua became a democracy eventually before we let go of that. El Salvador became a democracy through those policies. So I don't think that our record is as bad as people make it be. Now, as for always leave it to me to defend American American actions. As for arming the Kurds, the issue with that would be, let's say you arm the Kurds and they overthrow the regime. They might ask for their own state, and at the end of it, I commend to you to go check a small book written by my friend Michael Rubin, Kurdistan Rising, just raising all the issues that a Kurdish state would rise, from water rights to all kinds of instability among regional partners we have, from Iraq to Turkey, which is a treaty ally. So that is itself a problem if you use Kurds. Also, second is Iranian people are terrified by separatism. And let's say you arm the Kurds. How are you going to convince them that it's not going to lead to dismemberment of their own country? I'm not against arming the Kurds. What I'm saying is that it could lead to many complications that we have to think through first.
Okay. That makes sense. Is there... Then what do you see as the timeline? I thought Trump made a mistake saying this was 5 or 6 weeks, right? I think going into something like this, you have to be open-minded about it. Might be 4 weeks. It might be 4 months. It might be longer. Is the progress being made there that justifies the continued operation and enough to, at least in your opinion, stave off the anti-war political pressure that Trump is under?
As for the anti-war pressure,
it's kind of a farce, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, there was no anti-war pressure on Bush at this point of the Iraq War, and guess how it ended. So polls can always change. Now, I do think that the administration could do a better job in communicating its actions and objectives with the American people. I absolutely agree with that. The other side of it is that polls will change according to outcome. So if this is a favorable outcome, let's say in 3 months, Strait of Hormuz is completely open. We have annexed two islands in Iran as 51st state, and oil prices, gas prices are down, and Iran is not a threat. I don't think that the Americans would be upset with that outcome at all, and that there will be a pressure on them. But having said that, how long it will take, I see different estimates, and I'm not sure if I see different estimates with how long this is going to take. Just opening the strait, I've seen estimates from senior Navy admirals from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. I think that we have different plans for how to reopen the strait, and President has not decided on a plan, I would assume.
Okay.
What we are doing right now is degrading Iran's capabilities to attack shipping.
Right, so they're going after drone launches, missile launching sites, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not missiles, because Iran doesn't have many anti-ship missiles. It's mostly drones. You know, if you're the U.S. Navy and escorting a ship, it's much. You can intercept a few drones, but you cannot intercept a swarm of drones. So we're just going to degrade it to a reasonable number, so they cannot be swarmed anymore, and we can escort shipping then. Now, how long is that going to take? Admiral Cooper hasn't given a timeline, I would say wisely, but he seems confident that it's going to be accomplished not over a terribly lengthy amount of time.
So we recently had Marco Rubio come out. There's a good piece in the Wall Street Journal saying our allies should step up on Iran after the U.S. help for Ukraine. I love the sentiment, Shay. How much are our allies capable of stepping up? Because, like, Britain has exposed itself as not merely a paper tiger. There's no tiger there. It's just paper.
You know, there are minesweepers that they can send, but on the other hand, the Navy doesn't think that we need minesweepers. In fact, we retired our minesweepers because we have a different tactic for anti-mining, counter-mining measures. So there is a little bit here and there that they can help with. I would say the biggest help they can actually do is not participating in the mission, but we have to pull ships from across the world, especially in the Pacific. I would want them to replace our ships that we're pulling from in the Pacific to project power in defense of Taiwan, and so we can actually redeploy ours to the Middle East. I think that would be much better, but as far as firepower goes, we have all that we need ourselves.
In terms of there's been a lot of pushback, quite frankly, on Trump from the far right, which is kind of tied to it seems to be tied to anti-Semitism. How does the administration counter that? What can they do to tamp that down? Because whether it's a Tucker Carlson that you're talking about, a Candace Owens, I've seen quite a few others who, have demonstrated that their values have a lot to do with whether they perceive Jews to be in the mix of these kind of things.
Yeah.
How does the administration push back on that?
Well, first, let's just make a quick point that there was a poll how many Republicans supported Trump's efforts, and it was 9 out of 10 were supportive. So I think that's more magnified on Twitter and social media than in real life. And in fact, I generally believe that American people like Jews, and the more Tucker Carlson speaks, rather than turning Americans against Jews, he's turning Americans against himself. Now, having said that,
I love that idea. Yeah.
Having said that, the biggest accusation is that Trump is being manipulated by Bibi Netanyahu, and two things. One, it's Donald Trump. Nobody can tell him what to do. Second,
that is the biggest joke in any media today. Like, come on. Nobody has told this guy what to do for 50 years.
It's just, but second, just go out and say, I told him to stop attacking Iran in June. I think it was the wrong thing to do, but Trump did it, and Bibi stopped. Trump told Bibi to stop the war in Gaza, provided a plan, Bibi said yes. Go out and say, who's controlling whom here?
Right, right.
There's evidence.
No, yeah, absolutely. There's evidence, but not only is there evidence. I am, look, folks know I'm Jewish, but and I am a big supporter of Israel. We can all recognize that every country makes mistakes and does things that they would rather maybe be able to take back afterwards. But Israel's behavior throughout this war, throughout Gaza, has been phenomenal, and right now, they are proving themselves to be the only actual military ally we have on the planet capable of doing anything.
Well, Israel
maybe Poland
in combat,
too. But
I was going to say Poland and South Korea are actually quite formidable militaries too. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But you say that they are not. No country does it perfectly. Not if you listen to the press. According to the press, Iran is doing everything perfect. They're brilliant. They're doing everything right.
I heard yesterday they shut down all of our bases. They're all destroyed.
I heard that. Someone prominent said, "Oh, Iran has gamed this much better than Trump," and I was thinking, except that their first two commanders in chief are dead.
Right.
But that actually. Gets into something I do want to mention it, which is the problem with the press is they do not understand two things: Iran and warfare. For instance, everything you say is that, oh my God, this is an escalation. Well, as Clausewitz said, the nature of war is dual. It pulls you in toward escalation and de-escalation at once. If you want to change something, you have to do one of those things, and escalation is a perfectly acceptable move here. But, they've spent decades not studying Iran and war, so all they have to work with is what Trump says, not what's actually happening, and two, oil prices, which are temporary, right?
And proclamations from the UN, which are most often garbage.
So they have not. Those are the only things they understand.
No understanding. Shay Khatiri, thank you so much for joining us once again. We always love having you on the program. Breaking Battlegrounds will be back on the air.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds, our final segment. We have former Congressman Mike Rogers, who is a glutton for punishment and is going to run for U.S. Senate again. Last time, less than 1%.
Yeah.
I thought you had it.
We thought we had it too. At about, 11:30 p.m., we really thought we had it.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, Detroit, Michigan showed up at early hours of the morning with a van full of ballots, and, something changed.
Sun rises in the east. Detroit shows up with ballots, right? Are those the two things in the world?
No doubt about it. But you know what? It was what we ended up doing is building this great base across the state. So we got outspent. Think of that, 6-1. We lost by 232 votes per county.
Oh,
that's how close that election was.
It just times like that, you're sort of wishing, like, okay, you play it over in your head again. Take out the Detroit, show up at the box.
Yeah.
What could we have done differently in this county or that
completely.
county? Should I have gone to this one Lincoln Day? It's hard.
Here's the good news: we were able to correct. So we didn't. My wife and I didn't think we were going to do this again, because this is outrageously disruptive to your lives. But we looked at it and said, can we really win? And we realized if we got the national folks in early, if we didn't have a primary, and we got our ground game up earlier, we can win. And we've done all of those three.
That's
things.
fantastic. So, one question, I want to get some policy here. You were an FBI agent and you worked on organized crime. What's your favorite mob movie? What's the one you... So I talked to a former CI guy who consults for Hollywood, and he just said, which one's most accurate? And he goes, I will tell you this. Homeland's a joke. It's not even close to reality.
Yeah.
What's a movie you enjoy that's a mob... I mean, it's a guy thing to like a mob movie. So what's a mob movie you've watched?
Well, I mean, I love the Godfather series.
Yeah.
Hard to argue with those.
It's a classic.
And I think if you want to get a little more gritty, close to mobness, Goodfellas.
Yeah. A buddy of mine was actually one of the cameramen for Robert De Niro in Casino.
Yeah.
He was like the real guy.
Yeah.
I go, how was he? He goes, he was great as long as you didn't cross him. He was a wonderful person.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
I go, well, that's most relationships.
Although he seems to have lost his mind these days.
Yeah. Well,
politically, anyway.
Yeah.
And I love his work. Just don't like his politics very much.
I agree. So from 2011-15, you were the chair of the U.S. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Tell our audience, was Iran a threat then?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, how much did it come up in your meetings?
A lot. So what was happening then, which was interesting, is we were watching Iran ramp up their support for the Houthis.
Right.
The group that was up, on the border of Yemen and Saudi Arabia, who, by the way, are now shooting missiles at commercial traffic. They were training them, they being the Iranian Quds Force, training them, equipping them, giving them direction, giving them money, all of the bad things. And we saw that starting to happen back then, and that was 2011-ish. So we raised the flag and had lots of conversations about, hey, we might want to shut this thing down somehow. You can't let these guys become, unfortunately, with the world in the state that it was, it got, drifted to the bottom of the list. Secondly, there's three parts to a nuclear weapons program. Missiles, ballistic missiles, enrichment. You have to be able to take raw uranium and enrich it to 90% roughly. And then the last part is shaping the material, shaping that enriched material and sticking it on the top of a missile so that it actually explodes. And by the way, that's the hardest part. You can get through the other pieces, and guess what? With a supercomputer, and they had them underground. Matter of fact, some of these facilities were taken out by the president's decision to stop their nuclear program. Amen. And you can, through that modeling, you can actually shape it now. You don't have to actually blow it up underground like we used to do in America. You can now do this through computing modeling. And so they had all three parts. The big debate, this was 10 years ago. How long would it take them to put all three together for a bomb? Is it a week?
And that's 10 years ago.
10 years ago. So they were well along their way. And the information that came out now, we didn't believe they had ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile capability. They have really good missile capability. We've seen it. According to the reports I've read now, that they were very close to building that ICBM-capable missile, which clearly could have gotten to Europe with the little legs, could have gotten to the United States.
It sounds like they have the technology now for it.
I believe they do. I believe that's why. I believe there's some exigent circumstances here, and people forget the Iranians attacked U.S. interests, including killing U.S. troops 200 and some times between 2023 and 2025. This wasn't 10 years ago or 15 years ago, even though they did it then too. They've been at this a long time, and they look at the weakness of the United States. They weren't doing anything. And remember, the one thing I disagreed with Ronald Reagan is once they killed over 200 United States Marines, he just packed up and came home. I think that sent the wrong message at the time, and they've just been more brazen and more brazen and more brazen since. And I think the president is ending a war, not starting war. And I think if you think of what the Middle East will be if there's no nuclear threat from Iran, there's no ballistic missile threat from Iran, there's no major drone threat from Iran, and they can't mine the straits. They've taken out the capability to build those things and to deliver those things. And then we turn around and steam out and say, okay, now everybody work this out. That's a pretty good day for the world's peace and safety, I would argue.
For decades.
Yeah,
for decades. On amendment. Were you chaired when Obama did the Iran agreement?
Unfortunately.
So tell our audience, because I know Democrats, especially his podcast bros, love to say, well, we had this agreement. It was wonderful. Everybody was rainbows and dancing, and we're all happy. What was that agreement missing?
pretty much everything you needed to stop a nuclear weapon program. It was.
What did it do? Was it besides paper?
It gave them money, gave Iran money, cash.
Which they used to
freed up
give
some
to
things.
Hezbollah and Houthis and elsewhere.
Absolutely. That money absolutely directly went there. Matter of fact, Kerry said at the time when he was questioned, well, won't some of this money, and we're talking about pallets full of cash, won't some of this money end up in the terrorist hands? And his answer was, well, we think some of it. Okay, they knew that they were given money that would turn right around and end up with Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, to continue terrorist activities. And by the way, they supported 10 other of these kind of offshoot terrorist groups, including coming at us in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were very aggressive and causing a lot of pain, harm, and chaos.
So in the FBI, you dealt with organized crime. How is the Iranian regime like organized crime?
Oh well, they're much better at it than the mob is, because they use violence for political gain, right? So, matter of fact, quick story aside, I was talking to a guy who his name was Tony Tocco, who was a mean, nasty, old Sicilian-style gangster on the south side of Chicago, and as a new agent, my job was to get him from the courtroom to a little area off. Because the marshal's apparently doing something else, and so I had to sit with him, babysit with him. Obviously, candidly, some of the most entertaining time I spent in the FBI, because he knew he was going to jail for a long time. He was just talking, and he said, I said, well, why do you kill somebody if they owe you money? Right? This seems like a terrible way to collect money. And he said, it's all in the marketing. Right? This is a gangster talking. And so you think about what the IRGC is doing. Like they don't have to kill all of them. They have to kill enough of you that you believe that you oppose the regime. They're going to kill you. That is exactly the way the mob operates. And they controlled everything. And their whole life's desire isn't about taking care of the people. It's not about a prosperous Iran. It's how do we kill Jews? That's very, very important to them. And how do we oppose the West, specifically the United States? So that's why they jump up and down and yell, death to America, death to Israel, death to America. Guess what? They mean it. Yeah. And I can give you case after case of how they tried to do operations here in the United States. Thank God they haven't been successful. But we know that they have been trying for years.
I think that we're with Mike Rogers. He is running for Senate in Michigan, former congressman from CD8. I think that's what people miss is they don't understand. We like to all view ourselves as rational. Iranian regime has an end-of-the-world mentality.
Yes.
And so, when I left home, my dad said, you can't argue with a liar or a crazy person. Just remember that. Well, isn't that Iran?
Completely. And while we were doing, what is that definition when you do the same thing over and over again and you expect a different result? That's what was happening with Iran.
Yeah.
7 presidents. This is what's shocking to me, that half of America stands up today and doesn't really want the United States to win this conflict.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't
think
understand.
they're actually rooting against us.
I do, but you may not. I disagreed completely with Biden and Obama, but I didn't want them to fail. I never wanted them to fail. You don't want a country like Iran to succeed. I thought it was bad policy. I thought it was the wrong direction. I thought some of the things they did were head scratchers and frustrating, but I never once thought, I want you to fail in what you're doing.
Correct.
Today, that's not true. And by the way, those were Democrats. I didn't agree with them on pretty much anything.
We have a different view of where we want the country to go. Last question on this national security issue. How important is it that we do go and build a Golden Dome?
I think it's critical. One of the things that we were seeing even back when I was chairman was the proliferation of not nuclear as much as missile technology.
Right.
And so that ballistic technology, and let me back up one more time. If you saw how the Ukrainians took out strategic bombers of Russia, so I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but there was an operation that the Ukrainians did inside of Russia where they were able to take out strategic bombers. Like this would be our strategic deterrent. We put nuclear bombs on aircraft and fly them around like, don't mess with us because, we got these things flying around. That's Russia's version of that. And the way they did it was remote launch of these larger drones from trucks. So, the missile what you've got to do is set a deterrence high enough. Do you really want to go into the missile building business if the U.S. can knock these things out of the sky? It is a absolute deterrence. I think it's absolutely critical, important. The only mistake they made is they didn't put Michigan on the list to help build it. And by the way, when I go to the United States Senate, we're going to be on the list to help build it.
How do you feel the tariffs are working for the Michigan voter?
Obviously, tariffs can cut a couple of ways.
Sure.
But here's what the important part for Michigan is: we're seeing reshoring happening. For years, we had 2 Democrats in the United States Senate who I think walked away from working people, didn't understand the value of manufacturing. They say it, they talk about it, but they vote in a way that absolutely makes it difficult.
You saw Jimmy Kimmel's comment last night. Did you see that?
I didn't.
Mr. Mullins, who was just elected, or confirmed DHS secretary, he said he's just a plumber. What does he know about it?
There you have it.
And I think
that
that's
says
very much
everything you need to know.
Isn't that them now?
Yes.
And I think that's changed even since you were in Congress.
Completely. Completely. My dad was a shop teacher.
Which, by the way, we need back in the schools again.
I have called all across Michigan. We're going to put shop back in every high school in Michigan. I passionately believe this.
Yeah,
absolutely,
no,
and I
100%.
passionately believe
It's
it.
the
By
one thing AI can't take from these workers.
No doubt. And we have this huge need.
Yes.
And if we're going to defend America, Michigan, it was part of the arsenal of democracy. We built airplanes and tanks and vehicles, and we did all the things we needed to do to win World War II.
Well, matter of fact, there's a book I'm reading right now about spies, British spies in the U.S. during that time. And the reason the British kept saying in these classified memos that we want the U.S. involved in this war is the Germans don't realize there's Detroit.
Yeah.
They can just produce these at quantities that they can never match.
Yep.
We needed Michigan like that again.
Yeah. So think of this. Henry Ford, who, by the way, when I tell people vocational training is important, you can do amazing things. Michigan had the highest count of millionaires from the 40s, 50s, and 60s from doing hands-on work. They just took it to a new level, right? They were starting shops and starting these small tool and die shops. Henry Ford, no education, created that. He went from building Model T pickups with 10,000 parts in the matter of 8 or 9 months, building these B-29 interceptors with over 1 million parts. That's why we won the war.
Yes.
I mean, that engineering is an incredible feat. Here's the sad part. I'm not sure we could do that today.
No.
And so what I've been saying and run around the state is, hey, we're gonna dust ourselves back off here and refocus on what made Michigan great and what made America great, which was able to build things when we need it. And we have so let our defense industrial base atrophy.
Mm-hmm.
It is a huge problem. And so the good news is it brings jobs back to Michigan. These are high-paying jobs. We're going to get back in the defense industrial base business. We are going to be able to build in Michigan what we need to do to defend ourselves. We hope we never need it, but we got to have it. And with Democrats in charge, think of this. This is a great state. We lost an air base in the UP. We lost a sub-tracking station in the UP. We lost our ability to build tanks. We don't build components for the submarine force anymore like we used to do, and we don't build under 700-foot ships like we used to. Guess what? It all happens in America. Our 2 senators fell asleep at the wheel, and now we're paying a heavy price. That's why we need a change in Michigan.
When you were chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence, did they talk about, was manufacturing ever part of those, or just simply overseas threats? Did they ever talk about, say, hey, our base, our military industrial base isn't good, our manufacturing base isn't good, this is a problem? Did they ever come up in things like that?
Well, I mean, as chairman, you get to set the agenda, and so we did focus on a lot of that. And when I was there, cyber just wasn't getting the attention I believed it should. So I spent a lot of time. I'm self-taught myself cyber, honestly. I wasn't a cyber guy until I realized this is such a huge problem for the United States. So we did a lot of that, and we started talking about our capability to defend ourselves through the defense industrial base. We were worried at that time that our defense industrial base was getting so penetrated by cyber attacks, stealing our intellectual property, taking it back to places like Beijing. They re-engineer it, build it, and then face it back at the United States. So that was a huge problem. I spent a lot of time focused on that. And the ability, why can't we produce the amount of ammunition that we need to be safe?
Right.
And other things that we need to produce. And so that's been a cause of mine forever. And, you know, I got out of Congress because I just didn't think you're supposed to be there forever. I think it changes the way you think. And you get comfortable in that you shouldn't do that there. Been out in the private sector, cybersecurity primarily. Now I look at it and say, listen, nobody's being the advocate for the plumber to be the DHS secretary or the guy that worked on the shop floor in Michigan building cars, the Chrysler LeBaron. If you liked it, I built that one. If you didn't, must have been the other shift. But I will tell you, we need people who understand the importance of that work. And by the way, what other country in the world could a guy who's the son of a shop teacher who worked on a car assembly line be running and be the Republican nominee for Senate in the United States of America? Only in America can this happen.
It's our uniqueness. We're with former Congressman Mike Rogers running for U.S. Senate in Michigan. How do people track your campaign?
Rogers, Rogers, for Senate.com. Matter of fact, you help us out. We just launched today a petition, no work, no pay. My argument is if these members of Congress are scooting out of town and leaving federal workers not getting paid like our TSA agents, they should not get paid either.
100%.
So we're doing a petition. We'd love for your listeners and to get online at rogersforsenate.com, no work, no pay. You'll find it there. Sign up. Let's send them a strong message how disappointed we are in Congress for not doing their work and still taking a paycheck.
I love that idea. We got about a couple questions left here. So there's a real generational and partisan divide on the American economic system. We still have us folks over 40 who like capitalism. Overall, the country's 58%, too low for me, needs to be 70. But, you know, this Gen Z, these between the ages of 18 and 29, 62% think socialism's a better system. I think part of that is because they're struggling to make ends meet. Their school's expensive, apartments are, though rents are decreasing, as Trump advance said they would. Things are expensive. So I'm not really sure they're champions of socialism. I think it gets pushed in public schools a lot. What do we do to reverse that course? Because, you know, look, if the United States is not the free market capital of the world's in dire straits.
Oh, where else can we lead the world to a better place?
Yeah, we're the beacon.
This is the only place in the world that had that large middle class built on people's, basis of the American dream. So what's happened, I believe, is when the Democrats get in, they pass these really heavy regulatory regimes. Let me give you a great example. In 2023, in our state legislature, where the Democrats controlled it, they passed whatever fancy name that they poll test about, saying this is for puppies and kittens and green whatever. They passed this very big, complicated regulatory bill, so that our energy companies had to go out and build and try to find and buy places to put solar panels and windmills. Here's the crazy thing. At any time, only 20% are they functional. This is by them. I just talked to them yesterday. 20%. And you know what they have to do? They have to build a gas turbine to cover the fact that there's only 20%. It is the biggest sham. And what they've done is raised rates. So there's your socialism in action. This is the government in action that is taking away your ability to get better, cheaper energy rates that is cleaner. Gas is cleaner, by the way, than those coal plants. And we got one thing we have in Michigan is plenty of natural gas. Get out of the way. And so what they had to do, they were paying 5 and 6 times the value of an acre of ag land in Michigan because they were required by the Democrat-passed bill to have these solar panels. It was screwing up everything. Farmers were like, well, if you want to pay me 6 times an acre what it's worth, I'm going to, that's why I love farmers. They're going to sell it to you.
Yeah.
That's why I love farmers. But what it's done is it's interfered with our food production. And guess what? That's only 20% there. So they've got to pay for 2 systems to do one thing because you feel good and it's a virtue signal event. We got to shake ourselves out of this, and we got to let people understand what's that doing for you. I just came out with a housing bill, how we get people connected to housing. And it's not a new government program. The government doesn't give you money. It's about using your own money and how you can save tax-free for a down payment. And I won't go into all the details. You can go on rogersforsenate.com. It's wildly popular, by the way, and I think this thing will work. But think about what regulations do, and this is that socialism that they talk about. The government's going to do it better than you do. They just since the Democrats took over in Lansing, they've increased the cost of a home before you stick a shovel in the ground by $25,000.
Yes.
And you go, why is that? Well, for every $1,000 that you add that regulatory regime, it takes out 3,200 Michigan citizens that can buy that house.
Oh, my goodness.
So you're talking over 75,000 families can't buy that house because you've artificially raised the cost. Trust me, I would buy a home built in 2017 and feel pretty good about it. What they're saying is, oh my gosh, you got to have all of this regulatory regime because we weren't doing it right in 2017. Nonsense. And so that, again, is the socialism that these kids are being taught that they got to have and got to love. And it's taking opportunity away from them to get into a home.
Oh, it is, and it's depressing them. My chief of staff has 3 young children. Her 3-year-old likes getting mail, so I will send them postcards. And he's very excited when a postcard comes, right? Doesn't say anything. It's just a postcard with his name. So I sent him one 2 weeks ago.
I like getting those too, by the way.
Everybody, you can send it to rogersforsenate.com postcards. So I sent him a postcard here from Arizona 2 weeks ago. He just got it yesterday. That's in Utah.
Oh, you're kidding.
I mean, you and I could have walked it in
Yeah,
2 weeks,
exactly.
right? And she just, and she's the type of person that if she stepped in something, she wouldn't say it, right? And she's the ultimate optimist. And she just said, nothing works anymore with the government. And I think that's why we have this problem. I disagree with the comment that there's this great populism. I think what it is, because the press is not creative and they try to put people in categories. I think the Trump coalition was, stuff don't work anymore and I need it to work.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And so I think it's important that we elect people like you to the U.S. Senate who want things to work again, that not 25 to 32% of a housing cost is regulations, that they can just get into a house, right?
Exactly.
Our final minute here, I'll ask you this. Are you optimistic about America's future?
I am more optimistic than you can realize, which is why I'm
even when you're a cybersecurity expert.
Even when I'm a cybersecurity expert, there's going to be some AI cyber defense systems built. I know people are working on this now. So I say that because, and I look at the problems, and we have real problems. Michigan is a great example. We went from when I was going to school, top tier, we're now 44th in education, 30,000 manufacturing jobs. Those are middle class jobs gone. And you start looking at it and you go, can we fix this? This is so big, we can't fix it. I start looking at it and go, oh my God, we can fix all of this. And it doesn't mean big government intervention. In many ways, it means the government can get out and let some things work. And so I look at it and go, my gosh, imagine when we get back to an education system that teaches you how to read based on phonics. Holy mackerel,
And they're doing it in Mississippi.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're going to do it in Michigan too by the time I'm done. We're also going to get back in defense industrial-based manufacturing.
Good.
It's coming back. My wife says my optimism is a genetic defect. But I will tell you, I am so optimistic because I know we can do it. I talk to a lot of people who are like throwing up their hands thinking maybe we just can't do this anymore. I don't believe that. You unleash the American spirit on any problem, we'll get it fixed.
Well, your optimism means more because you've got those daily briefings on national security. So the fact that you're optimistic means something versus the rest of us in this room. Everybody, you can follow him at rogersforsenate.com. Last 30 seconds. Why should people vote for you in Michigan?
Because I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to get our kids back reading again. 60% of our fourth graders can't read in the fourth grade level. Nonsense. We're going to use Title I money to require reading mediation. We're going to get manufacturing back. We're going to get our energy rates pushed back down in Michigan because we're going to open up our ability to use the natural gas that we have, and we're abundant. And we're going to make our communities safer. And so if you look back up for a minute, think, gosh, I could have a great job that I can pay my bills, and I have a little extra at the end of the month. I know when I send my kids to school, they're getting an education, they're learning how to read. And by the way, my kids can walk in our neighborhood. I don't have to worry about being afraid to do that. And that has a whole list of things you got to do, including keeping the border closed. So these are big projects, but these are all things that can be done. And we're also going to make it so that you can buy a house again in a place like Michigan through my housing plan. And it's very unique. And by the way, for the conservatives, they know, oh my God, here we go again, another big government program. It doesn't do that. It allows you to save federal and state tax-free in these savings accounts that you can use for a down payment and pay the first year of your property tax.
That's
so we get these young folks using their own money to help build their life. I mean, imagine that. Imagine you get to use your own money to the purpose you want to do, including buying a home.
What a weird concept.
Yeah.
Former Congressman Mike Rogers, thank you for joining us today. Folks, you can find him at rogersforsenate.com. Help out. If you have friends or family in Michigan, call them up and tell them to get to work.
Yes.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. And
This
let's
is
get to work, guys.
Thank you. This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be back with you next week. Have a good one.